There we go. Okay, all you're gonna have to do is click down arrow to progress it.
All right, we're moving on to our last speaker here, who will be putting it all together and assembling a nutrient management plan and so forth. Kayla Griffith is with the university and is going to give that presentation for us.
Yes. Thank you, Brian. All right, I'm going to try to go quickly because I know we all have to leave and fight the traffic, right? So, give me 1 second here. All right, we've spent a lot of time talking about science, right? We've spent some time talking about regulations. We have spent very little time talking about what a nutrient management plan looks like, how you're going to be creating these documents. Now, I know there's a lot of you in here that you're in this course because your class says you need to get the certification. You're probably not going to write nutrient management plans, right? All this information is really important to understand when you see a plan, and then you have to make management decisions in general, and when you're working with farmers, when you're working in the urban ag sector, all that kind of stuff. If you are going to write nutrient management plans, I know there are some of you in here, some of you work for me, some of you will consult with me when you have questions, because that's what we do at the university, okay? You're going to want to take a course that we are going to offer hopefully this fall, if not this fall, this winter. It is a 2-day course. Historically, it's been 2 days in person. We might do some kind of hybrid. Depends a little bit on some incoming faculty that we have coming into the program. So that will be announced sometime after you take the certification exam. You pass it and you're like, okay, cool. I need to put it all together and I don't remember what Kayla said in 20 minutes. Okay, so we teach a more extensive class that goes through this. You've seen these slides, very important as we're federally funded. Okay, this here is a diagram of when you go to create your nutrient management plan, you're going to want to think through these steps and think through these processes. I'm not to be time conscious, I'm not going to go through every single detail of every single step, but I want to cover some things in general. You're going to start by collecting data, right? Some of you might inherit an old nutrient management plan. You might inherit some old information from maybe one of my plan writers, from someone who did the plan before. You might have some of this stuff. You're going to have to collect property information, right? What's the farmer's name? What's the farmer's address? Mailing address if they're different, which they often are, right? What county are you working in? What's your watershed, your acres farm, streams adjacent to fields and pastures, okay? This and the information that's on the next slide, a lot of this was covered in Brian's talk because this information is required by the regulations, okay? And it also has to be very obvious and present in the nutrient management plan. There's all of these very specific information about the parcel or the farm or tract or whatever you call it where you work. So you need to have an account ID number. You can find this in a couple of different ways. It might be on a tax bill or assessment if the farmer has that. I have never found a farmer who knows where that is. Okay, their wife or their person who is helping them with their papers files that away. They have no clue. You can go to the tax office, that's going to be time consuming. We have some really cool resources in Maryland. I prefer to use the Maryland Department of Planning Finder Online. It's visual, it's a map. You click the information, you click the address, you go to it. I can't remember if I have a slide later on, but it's very effective, very quick. Sometimes when our presenters have been presenting throughout this session, you've heard me making comments up here, oh, it's online. We have tons and tons of documents on our website. I have the link listed later on in slides. This is one of the pieces of information that we have put together to make the plan data collection easier for you, okay? So this is the farm data collection sheet. It has all of those terms I just used. And so you can utilize this. Our website has a fillable PDF if you like that sort of thing. Otherwise, you can print it off. A lot of times when I've been writing plans, a farmer comes to me and I'm scratching all the data down. And then it's good practice to put it somewhere organized so that you have it for later. And also that you make sure you have gotten everything because it is a regulatory requirement. When you go to our website, this is the link, we have a plan writing tools tab. That is our handbook. We no longer publish that handbook because these things are changing sometimes very frequently, right? One of the things that we talked about today, biosolids, that information changes fairly regularly, and we have that here in the manure sampling and testing section. So Lisa talked a lot about specifics of biosolids. We have guidance documents that can make that seem a little bit less confusing and more accessible to you. Basically the same thing with nearly everything we've talked about over the past few days. So if you feel overwhelmed, most of it we've organized for you so you can put these plans together. So under the data collection tab, that's the section we're talking about here. You pop that little arrow down, we have our data collection sheets. We have farm level, we have field level, because of course you need lots of field data, right? We have, if you have confined poultry, we have a specific litter data collection sheet, and then for manure, we have animal production manure data collection sheet. I'll go through all of those quickly in a little bit. So back to the tax and assessment information, SDAT is where you're going to find the most accurate information. You can utilize this real property data search. You have to type in the county, and then you have to put in the road or the street address or something like that. This is useful. I like this, but I like the map more. What you're going to be finding is the tax account identifier. Here we have the Western Maryland Research Facility property listed, and then this right here, this account identifier, is your tax account ID information. This is some of your counties, there's going to be more numbers, but for Washington County, which is where this is from, we are missing a number. And so on our website, we have a list of county codes for account IDs. Every tax account ID in Maryland has a county code associated with it. It goes in front. So for Washington County, it's going to start with 22. So you need to check that you have all of those numbers associated with that property. Data collection, going more specific at the farm level. So we talked about maps as part of the regulatory requirement. Basically, how that boils down in those documents that you can click on MDA's website, you're like, oh wow, this is a lot of intense information. A farm map needs to have a road name, easily identifiable, property boundaries, field boundaries, and associated field names or numbers. You might see those labeled as unique identifiers when you click on some of our information, basically saying the same thing, because you can name a field a name, you can name it a number, you can name it ABC, all that kind of stuff. The acreage of that field, and then if there's streams within or adjacent to the fields or pastures. You'll also see on some of my slides, and we've seen before, fields or pastures. If you're writing a nutrient management plan and somebody says, I got a bunch of horses, I got a bunch of pastures, I don't fertilize them ever, why do they have to be in the plan? That's the regulatory requirement. Treat pastures as you treat any type of agronomic field, okay? I emphasize that because I have had that question asked of me a million times in my career, okay? For map sources, you can use Google Earth. It does create a pretty good map. We have guidance on our website for that. What we prefer to use for our program is QGIS. It has a lot of power, but it is free to use. We also have guidance documents on our website. On our website, under the software tab, you can download QGIS files for the specific county you're working in. Those QGIS files are very large, so you probably want to download them to an external hard drive and utilize those that way. Technically, we can use hand-drawn maps. We can use FSA maps. We really don't encourage that anymore. There are items from that previous slide that we don't see in those types of maps. The accuracy is not as good, okay? Big thing right here is the setbacks. This is an image of what QGIS looks like. This is Carroll County. So you pull this up, you can see that it's just selected Carroll County. And we have got some water bodies, we've got some roadways, and then you can zoom into your farm and start creating your maps. This is an example map from our Central Maryland Research and Education Farm. And so this map meets all of the regulatory requirements. We have fields with their unique identifiers. You can see this farmer has just named their field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The associated acres. So they're all outlined very clearly. The road is very clear. QGIS, when you download the software or when you download the file from our website, it pops up property lines. So the property is already bounded by what is in QGIS. We have our key, which helps to explain where everything is. We also have the farm name. You can put the farmer's name to just make everything as good as possible. The farm address. And then we also like to see the tax account IDs in our plans when we have our advisors write that. It just helps with record keeping for that farmer, and it's something that MDA wants to see as well. The one thing that sometimes QGIS gets wrong is water bodies, okay? So you can see here, these are actually manure lagoons that QGIS did not identify. If you are in Western Maryland, you're working in Western Maryland, I have seen a lot of water bodies like streams that have been identified incorrectly. So it is on the farmer to tell you that there is or is not a stream in that field. MDA has a separate document that you need to fill out that says field 1 has this setback, field 2 has this setback, okay? That's on our website and MDA's website. So then for each field, you need to know what crops are going to be planted. Remember how Lisa had her nutrient management plan, and she had all the different crops. If you think there's going to possibly be multiple crops per field, you can put those in there, and you just explain to the farmer, hey, if you end up planting corn, this is what you use, okay? You need to know your yield goals. At this point, many farmers have those yield goals. Brian covered which yield goals you need to use, or you could use web soil survey. Last ditch resort, okay? Web soil survey is becoming a little outdated in that sense. We need the cropping history. Remember we talked about nitrogen and nitrogen credits. That's where we need to know about legumes and what was going over winter. We need to know if organic sources were applied, and we need to know that for the past 2 years, okay? Remember that mineralization over time? That's what we need to count for there. Type of application equipment and incorporation, that comes down to some of our recommendations, especially for manure. And then again, are there streams in the pasture? Field data collection sheet. So we just have all of the different sections that you can fill out. Again, utilize any best resource that you can come up with to make sure that you're capturing all the information you need. We've seen web soil survey briefly over the past 2 days, but here is an example of a field, and then they specifically wanted to look at the yield for corn in this field. So they clicked on a whole bunch of stuff, got to this field, looked at the yield, and so they're saying that on the majority of this field, we're probably going to be looking at 143 bushel corn. That's probably not too far off from what we would see in this location in Washington County. Okay, we collected our data, so we also need to make sure, right, that before we write the plan, we have all of the required tissue analyses, if tissue analyses are required, and that we have required soil tests. We went over this extensively, so you have to make sure you have all of your soil samples that you know. If the farmer hands you a list and it's got, this is field A, B, C, D, and then they told you the fields are like 4, 5, 6, 7, you got to figure out what's what. Okay, that happens sometimes. You need to make sure that throughout the plan, every single field is labeled the exact same thing. Perennial fruits will require tissue sampling. We have guidance documents on that, and I'm happy to assist you with that as needed. How long are soil analyses valid for? 3 years. Great. That might be the question. All right, now this, I want to specify something here. From an operational standpoint, there's been a couple questions about when do I have to run the PMT? When the field is over 150 FIV. But that is only if the farmer is going or wants to potentially apply phosphorus. If you have fields with FIV over 150 and they're like, nah, I'm just going to apply some nitrogen, maybe some potash, you don't have to run this. You don't have to touch this. Okay. And then there's a few things if the field's over 100. We'll talk about that in the PMT training. Okay. But just very quickly, you just saw this, all of this information that Nicole talked about, which is relevant to the PMT, is data you need to collect. We do have a data collection form on our website. It probably needs updated with some of the more very specific things that we need for the PMT. Okay, so she talked about slope and gradient, distance to surface water. With the field buffers, that can get a little interesting and tricky depending on if there's some NRCS cost share there. NRCS folks know what I mean about that. Tillage practice and timing, crop rotation. Often that the tillage practice and timing, you need to know every single operation that happens on that field over the year and the expected time. Okay, and you need to put that into Russell too. So that ends up being one of the most complicated things because also the way that you talk about your farm, like, you know, I'm going to do this type of operation on this date or whatever, the language that's in Russell 2 sometimes is different. So we'll spend a lot of time being like, oh, what do you think they meant by, like, you know, they said they were going to bush hog their stalks down. Well, bush hogging corn stalks isn't an option in Russell 2. So what's the next thing that we have to think about? So that's why we do a whole separate PMT training. So we go through the PMT. We'll talk about this winter, this fall sometime. Make a decision there, then you move on with your life. Okay. Now, we do have a lot of farms in Maryland that have livestock. And what you need to determine when you're thinking about livestock, how much manure is produced? Where is that manure going? Okay, can you utilize all of it? So, is manure produced on the farm? In terms of sampling, the one if that we didn't talk about or only briefly talked about is that if there's less than 20 animal units on the farm, you can use our standard book values. Okay. Now, if a farmer has less than 20 animal units and they want to do a manure sample, it's going to end up giving them a more accurate recommendation, right? Because our book values are standardized just based on numbers across the state. We collect them every year and we analyze them. But your manure on your farm is going to be different, okay? So I just want to highlight that as something to pay attention to. Again, we're going to sample as close to application as possible. We have heard that a few times. Sampling to get a most accurate sample. We went through that earlier today. We also have this indication from COMAR where originally it said sample twice a year until a uniform level is established, and then every 2 years. But in general, we would recommend a sample be taken every year. Then you need to figure out how much manure is being produced. We have a sheet for that I'll show you in a second. And then you need to account for it on the farm. So in this animal production and manure data collection sheet, we have a fillable PDF on our website. If you want to use this, again, making it as easy as possible for you. You need to write down a couple of things about the general sort of manure management on the farm. What months is the manure going to be spread? If they tell you winter, you're going to say no. In most cases, or they have to go to MDA first. Date of last spreader calibration, Hopefully you have this. This is an area that many of you working in the realm of providing information to farmers or going out and doing field work with farmers, we need to make some progress on manure spreader calibrations, okay? So date of last calibration, do they have storage, type of storage, how long is that storage going to be good for? Is it 6 months storage? Is it a year storage? There's specific things that happen in the plan if they're importing manure, and there's specific things that happen if in the plan if they're exporting manure. We have examples on our website to go through that. Okay, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to write down what kind of animals are on the farm, how many there are, how much they weigh, and then you're going to fill out their confinement period. You're going to be looking at that on an hourly basis across the year. Sometimes you might have to average. If it's fully confined, there's no averaging, they're always confined. And then you have to estimate bedding. Okay. In the plan itself, you have to provide this information for the farmer. Okay. We have these documents on our website. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You take the information from here, put it into here, print it out. Cool. We have upgraded Newman, so if you're going to be writing plans, you're going to be downloading Newman Pro 5.3 software. That's what I would recommend you do. You can write nutrient management plans just using Excel. That's what Lisa showed in her document. I want to highly emphasize that the software is nice to use. It might look a little old at this point, but it has everything inside of it. It is making sure you're putting the right information in the right places, good to go. So you can do all of this in your Newman Pro. It prints it out for you. Looks really nice. Okay, develop recommendations. That's what we've talked about over the past 2 days, right? We have our nutrient recommendations. That is what we are ultimately thinking about. That's ultimately what we're going to talk about with our farmer. The recommendations are based on yield goal for many things, and they're also based on soil fertility research. Again, we have a lot of guidance. We have a lot of guidance from scientifically based sources. That's what these are here. When we were talking about that some of the information the university hasn't researched, we haven't researched like ginger nutrient requirements, okay, or some of these very specific like minor crops that are grown in hoop houses and greenhouses, things like that. This is in bold, really big, because I want to really recommend Newman Pro software for most people to generate nutrient management plans. Okay. Again, we have our website with a bunch of facts. We've been through this stuff, right? Okay. We really need to consider nitrogen. We really need to consider site history when we're making our recommendations, trying to get information from farmers. What'd you grow last year? Did you plant a cover crop? That impacts if you had soybeans and now you're planting corn this year. Identify the nutrient source. If there's manure on that farm, they need to use it or they need to export it. Okay, that is the crux of one of the most confusing things that can happen in terms of nutrient management plans outside of the PMT, making sure that you're accounting for everything. So again, we have some of these rules that we've heard about. Fields that are receiving manure, you have to incorporate it unless it is a no-till option or a no-till operation, or there's a perennial crop, right? Like you're not gonna till in your grass. Or if MDA says, hey, there's a problem, manure application, we need to get this incorporated. Okay. We figured out how much manure there was. So we pop down here now. When I keep saying we need to make sure we have enough places for the manure, we need to figure out that they can utilize this on the fields they want to utilize it on, and that based on their application rate, based on their nutrient needs, that they can put that much fertilizer, or that much manure on that field, and which fields they're going to put it on. Okay. If they cannot utilize all of their manure, they have to find a place to export it to. A lot of this comes down to specificity of the regulations. So we have this document. You can see that for this example, we have fields 1, 2, and 3 that in the spring could utilize some manure, or the farmer wants to try to put that manure down on there. Okay, we've specified how many acres. We know that our manure calibration is 10 tons per acre. The spreadsheet does the calibration for us. So these 3 fields, we can utilize 190 tons of manure. In this example, this farmer has 200 tons of manure that's available, and we can only use 190. So we have an excess of 10. So what's going to happen to that 10 tons? You got to export it. Or it could be like, okay, do you have another field that we can apply this to? So on this sheet, if you don't see zeros and you don't see a little negative indicating there's a deficit, you've got to go back and have some more discussions with your farmer. These are our old Excel spreadsheets. We have some nice new stuff in Newman Pro 5.3. I'm having all my advisors use this because you've got it in one file on your computer. I really like having as few files as possible. If you could see my desktop, you'd understand why. Once you put all this together, you're going to compile a plan. We have an example plan on our website. It contains all of this information here. Okay, this follows within the regulations. We have an example of a cover sheet. MDA is going to want to see this when they review your plans. Not only is it information for the farmer that they are going to have to use on their annual implementation report, which every year they have to report what they did the following year. That's an AIR. They're going to use this information. Then MDA is going to inspect your plans occasionally. They want to see this stuff. We have written these documents. They're on our website. They include everything that you need to include. They have a really good walkthrough. Wherever it's blue, you just adjust it based on the plan that you're writing. So again, we have tried for, I mean, this program is pretty old now, right? It's a 30-year-old program. We have tried to make this as painless as possible for everyone who's writing plans, okay? And also want to emphasize, even if you're not writing plans, even if you're just here because your job told you had to come to this thing, this stuff is going to be on the exam, right? So how to use Newman is not going to be on the exam, but the concepts are going to be on the exam. The regulations are going to be on the exam. So when you need help, you're going to email me, except in a couple months, hopefully there's going to be a few more of us and you're going to email them too. We have our website, which walks through everything technical on how to do this, okay? You write a plan, you give it to the farmer, do a thorough job of explaining what is in there. A lot of these folks have had plans for 30 years, but especially if you've got a new farmer, if the farmer's kid is getting ready to take over, you're going to want to explain everything that's going on, okay? The other things that are important, so I just talked about this AIR thing. You're going to want to mention that, hey, in like January of every year, you guys are going to get a paper from MDA. It's going to be bright green. You've got to fill this out, okay? That's sort of part of your duty of being a consultant if you are working with farmers. It's like, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. Those record keeping requirements that Brian was talking about, it's good to talk about those. It's good to talk about things like manure storage with your farmers, just re-emphasizing things like setbacks, when you cannot apply organics, all those sort of things. And then from a practical standpoint, being a consultant, let them know, hey, I'll contact you in a year and we'll do a plan update. Or I expect you to contact me. Make sure you keep those lines of communication pretty open. There's some follow-ups and updates we can do. So follow-ups, we've talked about some of these things, some of these like in-season nitrate testing, manure spreader calibration, and then how are you going to communicate with them if there is an update that's needed. And again, Brian touched on this already. what happens next? This is y'all's next step, right? You're gonna register for the certification exam. You're gonna pass the exam, right? I'd be remiss to say as an educator that you really need to study for this. Even if you feel comfortable with what you've heard today, make sure you're reviewing your slides. Study in groups, right? Some of those things that like, okay, back in college or back in high school, what did I do to study? Takes a little bit more time now, right? But you want to make sure that you pass this thing on the first time. How to write a nutrient management plan. Timing is to be determined, as I'm about to get my new counterpart in a few months. And the same thing with our PMT workshops so that we can utilize both of these sessions to do more in depth. How do you do examples of these? You can ask me all of the complicated questions and I can help you out with that. Our website also has exam prep. We have the study materials and an example exam. That's here. You can look through these slides. The recordings are going to be online. I will get those posted hopefully by the end of the week. This is a new slide, not in your handout. So hopefully you completed the teaching effectiveness survey for NIA. If you could do this for me as well. This is what the university wants us to do to make sure that we are actually out here being helpful for you all, even though I only spoke to you for 30 minutes. No, I am here for questions. Email is the best way. My phone, right now our office is closed, or who knows how long. I also please need you to fill out this QR code, which is our demographics. I know we all hate surveys, we all hate demographics, but when you fill this out, it's really important. This is how USDA continues to determine if land-grant universities are going to get funding. Okay, so a lot of our funding comes from USDA NEPA, and they want us to fill out these surveys to make sure that we are serving you. All right, are there any questions? It was just like a lot of stuff in a quick time. Okay, good, thank you.
Look for the recordings on the.
Yes. Yeah, there are recordings. So I will just put you around this. Yeah.
Great work, Kayla.
Thank you. See you, Nick.
Send those links because your link in your QR code aren't in the slide.